Could this trade war destroy decades of economic cooperation? It might sound extreme, but the consequences could be far worse than most people realize. If you think the tensions between the United States and Canada are just another political dispute, you would be wrong. This time, the stakes are sky high. And in this video, we are breaking down the full story behind the escalating trade war and what it means for you. From skyrocketing prices to potential job losses, the effects of this crisis could ripple through industries, bank accounts, and even your daily expenses. And here is the kicker. Some experts believe this is just the beginning. Stick with me to the end, because this is more than just tariffs and politics. It is about the future of North American trade and your cost of living. So, what happened? Most people didn't see this coming. Trump's boldest economic move yet could change everything. On his first day back in office, President Donald Trump made a move that sent shockwaves through global markets: a 25% tariff on all Canadian imports. The announcement, framed as a necessary action to combat illegal immigration, fentanyl trafficking, and economic dependency on foreign manufacturing, caught many off guard. This wasn't just another policy shift, it was a direct challenge to one of America's closest trade partners. The White House argued that the tariffs would force companies to bring manufacturing back to the United States, boosting domestic job creation. But the reaction was immediate, and it wasn't pretty. Markets dipped, analysts warned of inflationary consequences, and Canada was left with a critical decision: accept the blow or fight back. World leaders, economists, and business owners voiced concerns about the ripple effects this would have on supply chains. American automakers who relied on Canadian parts faced higher costs. The agricultural sector, already struggling with global disruptions, saw another storm brewing. This was not just a challenge to Canada. It was a gamble with the entire North American economy. And Canada's response? It's even more shocking. Trudeau's counterattack, Canada strikes back. Trump expected Canada to fall in line, but he misjudged Trudeau's response. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau wasted no time in crafting a retaliatory strategy. His administration announced a series of counter-tariffs on American goods, targeting industries that would strike where it hurt the most: Trump's political base. The Canadian government listed billions of dollars worth of American exports that would now face their own heavy tariffs. Agricultural goods like Florida oranges, Wisconsin cheese, and dairy from key Republican-leaning states were among the first targets. Canadian officials made it clear that this wasn't just about economic retaliation. It was about making life difficult for Trump's strongest supporters. But Trudeau wasn't done. He had an even bigger weapon up his sleeve. The automobile industry became the next battleground, with nearly 50% of auto parts in North America crossing the border multiple times before reaching final assembly. Any disruption in trade would mean massive cost increases. Canadian officials knew that the U.S. auto sector, a critical part of the economy, would be forced to pass costs onto consumers, pushing vehicle prices higher. Then came the threat that truly had Washington worried: energy. Energy war, Canada's biggest threat yet. What if I told you Canada controls a resource America can't live without? The United States and Canada share one of the most intertwined energy networks in the world. Canada supplies about 60% of America's crude oil imports, alongside substantial amounts of natural gas and electricity. And now Trudeau's government was openly discussing a move that could cripple American industries overnight: cutting energy exports. The implications were enormous. Ontario alone provides electricity to millions of American homes. A disruption in oil and gas supply would cause fuel prices to surge and put pressure on the U.S. economy. Some experts believed Canada wouldn't dare follow through, arguing it would harm its own energy sector just as much as America's. But others warned that this was a game of economic brinkmanship, and Trudeau was willing to take the risk. Oil refineries across the Midwest depend on Canadian crude. If that supply were to be cut or taxed at a premium, it could result in gas price spikes, affecting everything from transportation to manufacturing. The energy sector's tight integration between the two countries meant that any restriction would create waves beyond just trade figures. It would hit businesses, consumers, and even financial markets. Meanwhile, American energy executives scrambled to assess how a Canadian export ban would impact them. Some warned that the U.S. refining industry wasn't equipped to quickly replace heavy Canadian crude with other sources. Others pointed to alternative suppliers, but at a much higher cost. The economic showdown was escalating fast, and the fallout? It could be devastating for both countries. The battle for public support. Who's really winning? This trade war isn't just happening in boardrooms. It's being fought in the streets. While politicians Canadians waged their economic war. Everyday Americans and Canadians began to feel the consequences. Prices on everyday goods started rising, hitting consumers where it hurt the most, their wallets. Canadian shoppers saw the cost of American products jump, while U.S. consumers felt the effects at grocery stores and gas stations. Protests erupted in both countries. American farmers, already struggling with previous trade disputes, feared massive financial losses. Factory workers worried about job cuts as supply chains suffered. Meanwhile, in Canada, industries tied to U.S. exports feared layoffs and economic slowdowns. Public sentiment became a key factor. Social media buzzed with debates, with some Americans questioning whether the tariffs were worth the economic strain. In Canada, a growing wave of nationalism fueled support for Trudeau's tough stance, with many citizens calling for long-term trade diversification to lessen reliance on the U.S. market. The media played its part in shaping the battle. American networks framed Canada's retaliation as an aggressive move that could backfire, while Canadian outlets focused on portraying Trump's tariffs as reckless economic warfare. Political analysts weighed in, predicting that this trade dispute could influence upcoming elections in both countries. Who stands to suffer more, American voters or Canadian industries? And here's why this trade war might not go the way Trump expects. The battle had only just begun, and the next moves would determine the fate of billions of dollars in trade. But if history has taught us anything, it's that economic wars rarely end without casualties. And in this case, both the United States and Canada were gearing up for a fight that could reshape their economies forever. The stakes were rising, and neither side seemed willing to back down. But as the trade war intensified, another crucial question emerged. Was this really about economics, or was something bigger at play? And who is going to be affected first? The auto industry at risk, a billion-dollar disaster. Imagine if every car in America suddenly got thousands of dollars more expensive. Not just luxury cars, but everyday vehicles. The ones people rely on to get to work, take their kids to school, and run their businesses. This is not a hypothetical scenario. This is the reality America could be facing if Canada follows through with its countermeasures against the proposed tariffs. For decades, Canada has been one of the biggest players in North America's automotive supply chain. Factories in Ontario and other provinces manufacture millions of vehicles and countless auto parts that fuel the American car market. Tariffs of 25% on Canadian imports would instantly drive up the cost of production. That price increase would not be absorbed by the automakers. It would be passed down to the consumer. General Motors, Ford, and other American manufacturers depend on Canadian plants for crucial parts and assembly. These tariffs would force them to rethink their entire supply chain. And moving production back to the United States would take years, not months. In the meantime, American car prices would surge. Analysts estimate that the cost of a mid-range vehicle could increase by several $1,000s, making it harder for millions of Americans to afford a new car. But the damage goes beyond car prices. Thousands of jobs in both countries are at stake. In Canada, auto plants provide employment for tens of thousands of workers who could see massive layoffs if production declines. In the United States, factory closures and production delays would hit Michigan, Ohio, and other manufacturing-heavy states the hardest. The ripple effect could destabilize the entire North American automotive industry. And that is not even the biggest industry at stake, the food fight. America's grocery prices skyrocket. What do Florida oranges, Wisconsin cheese, and Michigan dishwashers have in common? They are all about to get significantly more expensive, and not because of inflation or supply chain issues. In response to the proposed tariffs, Canada is preparing its own set of countermeasures, and American agriculture is in the crosshairs. A 100% tariff on specific agricultural products, including dairy, citrus, and processed foods, could send shockwaves through the grocery industry. The goal is clear: to put pressure on the political allies of the administration pushing these tariffs. Farmers in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Florida, many of whom rely on Canadian buyers, would see a sudden drop in demand for their products. Dairy farms could be hit especially hard, as Canada is one of the biggest importers of American cheese and milk product. Florida's citrus industry, already battling climate challenges, would struggle even further as Canadian retailers turn to alternative sources for oranges and juice. For the average American, this means higher grocery bills. Without Canadian buyers, American farmers will have to offload their surplus elsewhere, likely at reduced prices that could make domestic farming less sustainable. Meanwhile, Canadian consumers would see a shift toward European and Latin American agricultural imports, reshaping the food trade balance between the two nations. And here is where Canada's strategy gets even more ruthless. The electric vehicle war. Why did Canada single out Tesla? The reason will surprise you. As part of its counter-strategy, Canada is proposing a 100% tariff on Tesla vehicles. At first glance, this might seem like an attack on electric vehicles. But the real target is not the technology, it is the man behind it. Elon Musk has positioned himself as one of the most vocal allies of the administration imposing these tariffs. His influence over economic policy and his outspoken political stance have made Tesla an easy and highly visible target for Canadian retaliation. A 100% tariff would effectively double the price of Tesla vehicles in Canada, making them unaffordable for most consumers and crushing Tesla's market share north of the border. Beyond Tesla, this move signals a broader attack on American technology and innovation. If tariffs on electric vehicles take hold, they could expand to other tech industries, further fracturing the economic relationship between the two nations. But Tesla is not the only company in danger. Every company in America is. The energy crisis. Could the U.S. survive without Canadian oil? What if gas prices doubled overnight? That is the risk America is facing. Canada is the United States' largest foreign supplier of crude oil, providing more than half of its imported fuel. If Canada decides to cut energy exports in response to tariffs, the consequences could be catastrophic. Refineries in the Midwest and Northeast rely on Canadian crude to keep up with demand. Without it, the United States would be forced to source oil from other countries, such as Saudi Arabia or Venezuela, which would drive up costs and increase fuel volatility. The logistical nightmare does not stop there. Even if the United States attempted to replace Canadian energy, it would require massive infrastructure adjustments that could take years to implement. Pipelines cannot be rerouted overnight, and shifting to new energy suppliers is not as simple as flipping a switch. The result? Skyrocketing prices at the pump, increased transportation costs, and economic instability for millions of Americans. But the harshest reality? Even Canada might regret this move. The United States is not just Canada's biggest buyer, it is practically its only buyer. If Canada were to cut off oil exports, it would face its own economic downturn, losing billions in revenue and forcing the country to scramble for new buyers, a process that could take decades to stabilize. The question now is, how far is each country willing to go before both suffer the consequences? Trump's next move, will he double down or back down? Trump has never been one to back down from a fight, whether in business, politics, or international relations. His reputation has been built on projecting strength and dominance. But could this time be different? The economic stakes are soaring, political pressure is mounting, and even within his own party, there are growing concerns about the long-term consequences of his trade war with Canada. The White House has been quick to defend its tariffs, insisting they are necessary to protect American industries and reduce dependency on foreign imports. The administration has framed Canada as an unwilling partner in key policy areas, citing border security and trade imbalances as justification. However, behind the scenes, officials are growing increasingly concerned about the ripple effects on American businesses and consumers. As the tariffs begin to take their toll, manufacturers are seeing rising costs, consumers are facing higher prices, and key industries like the automotive sector are struggling to adapt. Even within Trump's own party, cracks are starting to form. Republican lawmakers from states heavily reliant on Canadian trade, such as Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, are voicing their concerns. These battleground states are crucial for Trump's re-election bid, and their economies are feeling the pressure. Farmers who rely on Canadian exports, automakers who depend on cross-border supply chains, and small businesses that source Canadian materials are all sounding the alarm. The question is, will Trump listen? There are two possible paths forward. He could dig in his heels, imposing even more aggressive tariffs in an effort to force Canada to make concessions. Or he could pivot, seeking a resolution that allows him to claim victory without pushing the American economy into deeper uncertainty. And here's where things take an unexpected turn. Canada's internal conflict. A nation divided. Not everyone in Canada agrees with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's hard stance against the United States. While his administration is determined to push back against Trump's tariffs with retaliatory measures, provincial leaders are divided on the best course of action. The growing economic strain has sparked fierce debate within Canada's political landscape. Alberta's Premier Danielle Smith, for example, has voiced strong opposition to escalating tensions with the United States. Alberta's economy is deeply tied to energy exports, particularly oil, which is heavily dependent on American buyers. Cutting off or limiting supply to the United States would not only damage the American market, but could send shockwaves through Canada's own economy. The province's oil industry has warned that retaliation against the United States could backfire, leading to job losses, investment declines, and long-term uncertainty. Other provinces, particularly those with major manufacturing sectors, are also wary. Ontario, a key hub for automotive production, relies on a seamless trade relationship with the United States. Ontario's leaders have expressed concerns that prolonged tariffs could hurt Canadian industries as much as their American counterparts. Some have argued for a more strategic approach, targeting select American industries while preserving critical supply chains. On the other side of the debate, there is growing pressure for Canada to stand firm. Many see Trump's tariffs as a direct attack on Canadian sovereignty and economic stability. Political figures, industry leaders, and labor unions are calling for stronger action, arguing that conceding to Trump's demands would set a dangerous precedent. With provincial leaders clashing over the best strategy, the question remains: should Canada de-escalate and seek compromise, or push even harder? And the decision they make could change Canada's future forever. The global fallout, how the world is reacting. This trade war is not just a North American issue. It is sending shockwaves through global markets, drawing reactions from some of the world's largest economies. The dispute between the United States and Canada is reshaping international trade alliances, and major players are beginning to pick sides. China, already locked in a trade war of its own with the United States, sees an opportunity to strengthen its economic ties with Canada. In recent months, Beijing has signaled its willingness to expand trade agreements with Ottawa, offering new markets for Canadian goods. This move could help Canada mitigate some of the damage caused by American tariffs, but it also raises new geopolitical risks. Aligning more closely with China could put Canada in a difficult position, caught between two global superpowers with competing interests. The European Union is also watching closely. European leaders have condemned Trump's protectionist policies and have expressed support for Canada's retaliatory measures. Some have suggested fast-tracking trade negotiations with Canada to counterbalance the growing volatility in North American markets. A stronger Canada-European Union trade partnership could reshape global trade patterns, reducing reliance on the United States and creating new economic opportunities. Mexico, another key player in the North American trade landscape, is in a precarious position. While the country shares many trade concerns with Canada, its leaders are wary of becoming too entangled in the dispute. Mexico's economy is heavily reliant on exports to the United States, and officials are treading carefully, seeking to protect their own interests without alienating either side. What all of this means is that the battle between the United States and Canada is no longer just about these two countries. The consequences are global, and the decisions made in the coming weeks could redefine international trade for years to come. And here's why this might just be the start of a much bigger economic shift. The breaking point: will this end in a deal or disaster? One final decision will determine whether this trade war ends in resolution or spirals further into economic chaos. Behind the scenes, negotiations are unfolding in secret as both sides search for a way out of the escalating conflict. Despite the aggressive public posturing, backdoor diplomatic efforts are intensifying. Canadian and American trade officials have been engaged in discussions, exploring possible compromises. There is growing speculation that a temporary suspension of tariffs could be on the table, allowing both governments to claim partial victory while preventing further economic damage. But the risks of continued escalation remain high. If no deal is reached, the consequences could be severe. The longer the tariffs remain in place, the more damage they inflict on industries, workers, and consumers. Supply chains are being disrupted, investments are being delayed, and economic uncertainty is growing. The ripple effects could push both economies into a downturn, with lasting repercussions on trade relations. At the heart of it all is a simple but critical question: is either country actually willing to compromise? The answer will shape the future of North American trade, determine the economic stability of millions, and set a precedent for future international conflicts. The breaking point is here, and the world is watching. The future of North American trade. Could this trade war destroy decades of economic cooperation? That is the question weighing heavily on business leaders, policymakers, and everyday citizens as tensions rise between the United States and Canada. The United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, a deal that replaced the North American Free Trade Agreement, was supposed to solidify economic ties and create a stable framework for trade. But recent escalations have left many wondering if this agreement is on the verge of collapse. The foundation of the trade agreement was built on the idea that open markets and close economic ties would benefit all three nations. However, the United States' decision to impose sweeping tariffs on Canadian imports has shaken this foundation to its core. Canada's retaliatory measures, including 100% tariffs on key American industries, have only intensified the conflict. Businesses that rely on smooth cross-border trade are now facing higher costs, disrupted supply chains, and growing uncertainty about the future. The stakes could not be higher. The collapse of the trade agreement would send shockwaves through industries that depend on integrated supply chains, from automotive manufacturing to agriculture and energy. Experts warn that without a structured trade framework, both countries risk economic instability, job losses, and decreased investor confidence. Energy independence. Can America live without Canadian oil? Trump claims America does not need Canadian oil, but is that really true? The United States has made major strides in boosting domestic energy production, but the reality is far more complicated than simply turning off the tap on Canadian imports. Canada supplies nearly 2/3 of the crude oil imported by the United States, making it the country's largest foreign energy provider. This oil fuels American refineries, powers industries, and keeps fuel prices in check. In theory, the United States could ramp up domestic drilling to compensate for lost Canadian imports. But in practice, this transition would be neither quick nor cheap. Refineries in the Midwest and Gulf Coast are specifically designed to process the heavier crude that Canada exports. Shifting to lighter domestic crude would require extensive modifications, an expensive and time-consuming process that could take years to fully implement. In the meantime, supply shortages could drive up fuel prices for consumers, creating economic pressure in an already fragile market. There is also the question of alternative suppliers. While the United States could look to other oil-rich nations such as Saudi Arabia or Venezuela, relying on geopolitical rivals for energy security comes with its own risks. Supply chain vulnerabilities, price fluctuations, and diplomatic tensions could make foreign oil far less attractive than the stable and predictable imports from Canada. And here is where the situation becomes even more unpredictable. Canada is already considering redirecting its oil exports to other global markets, particularly Asia. If the United States severs its energy ties with Canada, it may find that re-establishing them in the future is not so simple. The infrastructure investments and trade partnerships required to shift exports elsewhere could mean that, once lost, Canadian oil may not be readily available to the United States again. Canada's global strategy, new trade alliances in the works. If Canada cannot rely on the United States, where will it turn next? The answer may lie across the Pacific and the Atlantic. With uncertainty surrounding its largest trade partner, Canada is actively exploring new economic alliances that could permanently alter North America's trade balance. Asia has emerged as a critical player in Canada's long-term trade strategy. Countries such as China, India, and Japan have shown increasing interest in Canadian energy, agricultural products, and technology. Canada has already made moves to strengthen these ties, including signing trade agreements and investing in infrastructure that allows for greater export capacity to Asian markets. Europe is another key focus. With the comprehensive economic and trade agreement in place between Canada and the European Union, there is significant potential for deeper economic integration. European nations seeking reliable and stable trade partners may welcome increased access to Canadian goods and resources. This shift would not happen overnight, but the groundwork is being laid for a future where Canada's economy is less dependent on its neighbor to the south. And here is where the United States may come to regret its approach. By forcing Canada to look elsewhere, the United States is inadvertently strengthening its competitors. If Canada successfully diversifies its trade, it will no longer be beholden to American economic pressures. That means future negotiations could shift in Canada's favor, reducing the leverage that the United States has long relied on. This is not just about tariffs or short-term economic fluctuations. This is about the long-term balance of power in global trade. If Canada successfully repositions itself as a key global player outside of the United States' sphere of influence, the economic repercussions for North America could be profound. The trade battle may have started as a dispute over tariffs, but it could end with a complete reconfiguration of the world's economic alliances. But what's your thoughts on this? Let's know in the comments.